Hey, everybody who's just joining us, please put into the chat where you're coming from and what is your favorite David Baldacci book. I'll say that again. Put in the chat where you're coming from and your favorite David Baldacci book, and we'll be talking about all kinds of books tonight. So, all right, got a couple more seconds while we wait for everybody to come in. And normally I'd be asking David his favorite beverage, but we get people from Tewksbury and Chelmsford and Arizona and Massachusetts and Groveland and oh my gosh, wow. So remember, in the chat, put in where you're coming from and your favorite Baldacci book. And we're going to start in just a sec. Oh, love them all. So somebody in the chat just had a Sophie's Choice moment. Okay. So I think we probably have almost everybody here. Like I said, in the chat, we are having everybody introduce themselves about where they're from and their favorite David Baldacci book. So we're going to get started. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I'm really thrilled to be here with David Baldacci, one of our favorite writers. We can't keep his books on the shelves in the library, and I don't think bookstores can either. So we'll be talking about David's books in just a minute. I just have a few things to tell you first. We are recording this session, and it is being live streamed on Facebook. So everybody who can join us from anywhere you are, that's pretty exciting. If you're going to ask questions, please put your questions in the Q&A and use the chat for comments or tech issues. We are paying attention to that. And I would really like to just say that this is a collaboration. This program has been a collaboration of 39 libraries to bring all of these people together to listen to David. And I have to say that I'm very excited by that because I think that the power of libraries is enormous. And I'm really pleased with this sort of collaboration. If you're here, we'll put a list of all the libraries in the chat. Oh, look, Robert already did. And if you're here from one of those libraries, shout it out. We are also partnering with Wellesley Books and you can buy signed books from David from them. And as you probably already know, signed books are gold. So make sure that you run over to Wellesley Books online if you want to and order his books. And they will be coming, I think, with a book plate, right, David?
That's right, yes.
Perfect. Okay, they make great gifts. And at the end of, or tomorrow, Robert will send out a feedback survey and a link with the recording, so you'll be able to share that with all of your friends that weren't able to make it tonight. All right, so let's get to it. David Baldacci, as you all know, is a global #1 best-selling author and one of the world's favorite storytellers. His books are published in over 45 languages and in more than 80 countries with 150 million copies sold worldwide. His works have been adapted for both feature film and television. He's the co-founder, along with his wife, of the Wish You Well Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting literacy efforts across America. And as a librarian, that just does my heart good. He is still a resident of his native Virginia, and you can visit him on his website, davidbaldacci.com, and his foundation at wishyouwellfoundation.org. So again, I'm thrilled that you're here, David. We're so excited to be chatting with you today about Mercy, your newest book. But before I get to that, one of the things you had on your website was that at the age of 5, your mother gave you a notebook. Was that the start of your career? And what was that about?
I was one of those little kids who never shut up. I was called the Austin Avenue Lawyer. That's a street I grew up in, Richmond, Virginia, because I argued with people about everything all the time. And ironically, I grew up to be a trial lawyer in Washington, D.C. So obviously I haven't shut up for a really, really long time. But, and I was also sort of the kid who was designated in my neighborhood to be the one that come up with all of our adventures, after school and during the summer. So where we'd go into the woods and then we'd build forts and we'd have these battles and these adventures and journeys and all that. And I sort of was the one who choreographed all that. I loved that. So I was talking nonstop all the time, these telltales, yarn stories. And my mom did, I think I was probably 7 or 8, and she gave me a journal. And she said, honey, some of the stuff you've been talking about all these years, why don't you try writing it down? You love to read. Maybe you can write your own book. And as soon as my pen sort of hit the paper, I was like this epiphany. I was like, my God, I could create something that other people could enjoy. And years later, I went back to my mom and I said, what a gift you gave me that day. And thank you so much. And my mom said, honey, I'm so glad it's worked out for you. And quite frankly, I just wanted to shut you the hell up because, you had gotten on my last nerve, boy, and I needed a little peace and quiet. So that was sort of the inauspicious start of my literary career. But for that little journal and, this epiphany of being able to write this stuff down, I might not be sitting here today. So it was quite a gift, regardless of the motivation on behalf of my mother.
Well, I thought that was really interesting because she didn't hand you a soccer ball or a fishing pole. She handed you a notebook.
Yeah.
So she obviously knew that this was a journey that you could take.
Yeah, I was a library rat. We would go, my brother and sister and I would go to the library every week, either the school library or the county library where we lived. And I had this deal with librarians. They would let me check out more than the limit because I knew I would read all those books and come back the next week for more.
Mm-hmm.
And, I never left Richmond as a kid. We didn't have a chance to really travel, but I saw the world through books. I saw people and read about people that didn't look like me, dress like me, eat like me, pray like me, speak, learn like me, but we share this common core of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
That really has infected me and made me the person I am today. I'm deeply empathetic to other people. I don't judge other people. I'm voracious about learning new things. I'm ever curious. And I know all of that really started in the library for me.
Wow. Well, I'm a little bit verklempt. Sorry, hold on a second. Okay. So I love that, obviously, that you love libraries and books and that your journey started with that one notebook. So if you've been living under a rock and you've never heard of David Baldacci, what should we know about you?
I'm a curious amalgam of being an introvert. When I don't really know people, I sort of shy away and don't really talk a whole lot. But when I'm on stage and I have to perform, I really enjoy it. It's like you're in isolation all this time writing, and where I'm just by myself in my own head, which I need to be. But it balances out when I get out to meet people and
Mm-hmm.
talk about writing and books and all that. And I'm very comfortable doing that if that's what I'm doing in that particular role. And I was a trial lawyer for 10 years. So trial lawyers are all hams. They get up on stage. It's called a courtroom, and they do what they do. So it's a curious amalgam. So if I didn't really know you, and let's say you had seen me speak somewhere and you would think, oh my God, he likes being up in front of people just talking away. But if I met you at a party and I didn't really know you personally, I wouldn't come over and just try to overpower you. I would sort of go over to the corner. I'd watch everyone else. I'm like Harriet the Spy. Remember Harriet the Spy? I love watching other people. And I've done it my whole life. And I think that a writer needs to have many attributes. But one, I think they need maybe greater than any other because it keeps the story ideas coming your whole life is curiosity, curious about people. I write about fiction, but I write about life. And so in order to do that, I have to understand it. And the only way to understand it is to walk out the door and keep your eyes and ears open. And that's what I do.
Right. Absolutely. And it sounds like that's where you get a lot of inspiration for your stories.
I absolutely do. I mean, people say, are you ever going to run out of ideas? And I said, well, not so long as I keep waking up, walking down the street and seeing stuff that can be very inspiring. And it doesn't take a whole lot. It's just, it could be, I see somebody get on a bus with a package and I just ask questions about where's the bus going, what's in the package, or two people talking and one leaves and walks around a corner and then you wonder what's around the corner and what were they talking about. So you never know where inspiration is going to come from. I've seen people that I find really physically interesting, and I might take a few of those attributes and graft them to a character in a book. I've never taken anybody whole cloth from real life and put into a book, but everything else is pretty fair game. And again, I've never lost my curiosity, I don't think I ever will. That's what drives me. That's my motor.
Got you. I think it's interesting having this conversation with a writer because I could see the same thing you do, and I would have a completely different perspective and wouldn't think of how you could make a story out of it. So that's maybe the storytelling aspect.
Yeah, it's I think it is. It's asking that additional question, what if, where, why, who, and tacked on to, I think really what, being a storyteller is just taking something you may have seen and then taking it to its natural conclusion if you add a few fictional pixie dusts to it. And then always wondering, how can I build on what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing, what I'm observing? And in order to do that, you just have to start asking yourself some questions. And then you can go into finite, areas of research and knowledge, which I do with all of my books. And I find that the more I research and the more I learn about its subject matter, the better plots, more well-developed plots and plot twists I can come up with. When you research, the key is to leave almost all of it out. You're not writing, when I wrote this book, I was not writing a textbook. I was writing a novel. It required a lot of research, but all those hours and days and months of research could come down to a line of dialogue, a description in a paragraph, and just somebody talking about an observation they're making. And that's enough. If for research to be in the novel, it has to satisfy, at least for me, three things. It either has to provide information that a reader needs to know, it needs to move the plot forward, or it needs to develop or fill out a character. If the research doesn't do that, then you should think long and hard about whether it needs to be in the book or not.
And, you've been writing now for about 20 years at least, and this is your 40th book. What made you go towards mysteries, thrillers versus other genres?
When I was writing short stories, I was high school and college, they weren't mysteries or thrillers, but I grew up reading mysteries and thrillers. I was a huge, Agatha Christie fan, Conan Doyle. As a little kid, I read Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators, which I think was far cooler than the Hardy Boys. But most people don't agree with me on that. That's okay. I love the puzzle piece to it. I remember somebody asked John Updike one time, how come you've never written a mystery? I don't know if this is apocryphal or real, but I like to think it's real. Why have you never written a mystery, Mr. Updike? And he said, I'm not smart enough. Because a mystery needs to have all the other elements of any other type of fiction. You have characters, you have a plot, you have a narrative, all this other stuff. But on top of it, you overlay this puzzle, this mystery. So you have to lay clues and red herrings and foreshadowings and have payoffs that other novels don't have. And I enjoy that checker/chess game. The readers, I know they want to figure it out before the end, so they can get on Amazon and go, I figured it out before the end. I figured it out on the last 3 pages, so you didn't get me. So that stuff. So that I've always been drawn towards that. The one, because I loved the reveal at the end. You're trying to figure out the solution before. And also you can really create some really compelling characters. And for me, on a more serious note, I think that crime fiction is really good because, in real life, we don't always get justice. The bad person is not always held accountable. But in crime fiction, they usually are. So you get a fix for that. And you're like, okay, I feel better about the world because real life was really getting me down. So I'll read a book where the hero wins and the bad guy is vanquished and all is right for the world. I kind of like that feeling too.
We will get to talking about mercy in just a minute, but I'm really interested in this topic of mysteries and thrillers because I wondered about that. Like, why do we as readers love mysteries and thrillers? I mean, they can be pretty dark. And, we've had some dark times and, why would you still pick up a mystery or thriller? Because, even when it's tough outside.
I always call it, it's the adult boogeyman. So, when kids are little and they don't want to be scared, but they want to be scared, they don't want to look under the bed, but they have to look under the bed because the monster might be there. So when you grow up, you still want that safe scare. A lot of people read about serial killers. I mean, these horrific monsters who do terrible things to other human beings. I think it's just natural for us to go, oh my God, I'm a human being. That person is a human being. What is the difference? There before the grace of God go I. Why? Is it just because he's missing a chromosome, or was it, just a horrible childhood? What happened there? I'm curious about how these types of people can come out of humanity. But at the same time, nobody wants to meet Ted Bundy in a dark alley. I mean, you don't. But you can meet, Ted Bundy in a book and have a safe scare, that I call it. So you get to your fix of psychologically what creates these monsters, but you never are in danger of being personally harmed or affected by that monster. I totally think that's what drives this. We sort of have this innate, insatiable thirst for, God, where do these people come from? And we want to learn, and look at some of the things that they do. And then at the end, we can walk away going, well, thank God, that I'm not involved in that. I'm never going to meet that person, hopefully. Safe scare, guaranteed. It's a safe scare.
Safe scare. And I was going to say, I wouldn't want to meet Ted Bundy in a lightened alley either.
I wouldn't want to meet him in a crowded train station.
Exactly. In a book would be fine. Which actually brings me to one of the questions I had for you. And again, we will get to mercy in just a bit. But how do you get into the head of all of your characters? You have good and bad and evil, and you have, what did I say? Let's see. Good, bad, survivors, monsters, everything along the spectrum. So how do you get into the heads of all of these different kinds of characters?
I'm the sort of writer who I don't outline everything before I sit down to write. I don't know the ending of any novel I've ever started to write until I get close to the ending. So I write sort of organically. And the way to do that is to immerse yourself in the story and the characters. I always use this analogy. If you want to learn how to drive a Formula One car, there are a couple ways to do it. You can read a book or take a class about how to drive a Formula One car, or you can get in a Formula One car and drive a Formula One car. And they're two totally different experiences. And writing an outline and writing a novel are two totally different experiences. One, the outline is not a sense of urgency. You really haven't met the characters yet. Yeah, you described them, here's what you want them to do, but you haven't seen them actually do it on the pages of a novel. It's almost like preparing to fight in battle and then fighting in battle. It's just a different experience, and your mind sees things differently. So if you're in the middle of all of this, your synapses are firing off at a really high level. The stakes are high. Your characters are in danger. You have to figure out where they're going to go and what you're going to do with them. And that's the way I like to write. So for all these characters, how I get into their heads, I immerse myself in the story. So I'm right there with them the whole time. And at the same time, you have to prepare. If I'm writing about a character who's really evil, that I need to prepare that character and my take on that character by defining what is the motivation and what drives this person. I don't like books where you have this incredibly evil person and they do all these terrible things throughout the book. And at the end, and you're waiting for why, and the why is, yeah, they're nuts. Yeah, it is nuts. That is not satisfying. That is not gratifying for me. So at the same time, you're building up the terrible things they do. You've got to build a backstory that will be revealed in the forward story about why. That's what people really want to know. Why?
Mm-hmm.
It's like this. You have to give. If you ask extraordinary action from people, you have to provide extraordinary motivation, and that can take the shape of many different things. But so I think that's why if I were outlining and then writing the novel, I wouldn't have that level of immersion I would do to be able to really get into the heads of all these characters. It would feel kind of fluffy to me. I did a character profile. Okay, what does the character profile say? This person, there's a disconnect there for me. I'm not saying don't outline. If you're comfortable outlining and you need to know everything in the novel before you sit down to write it, go for it. I'm just saying that you don't have to do that. Every writer needs to find a process that works best for him or her.
So a couple of people in the audience would like us to speak a little bit slower. I know I have a tendency. I know I want to gallop along because we only have an hour.
I apologize. I always have.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just wanted to point that out that we can take our time a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah, let's get into Mercy a little bit because it goes right into that character description you just talked about. Like, how did you create the character of Alti? Is it Alti or Alti in your head?
Atlee.
I'm sorry?
Atlee.
Atlee. Okay. All right. So how would you describe how she popped into your head as a character?
I went to the Grand Canyon a number of years ago with my wife and another couple, and we did the tour and went to the canyon, and I found it to be a fascinating place. And I thought I'd love to set a mystery or a thriller here. And I was thinking about a new character series. And I've written about other female characters in my novels, Secret Service agents, FBI, but never a lead series character. And I had written about a character in the King and Maxwell series, Michelle Maxwell. She was a member of WIFL, and that's an acronym it's a real organization. It stands for Women in Federal Law Enforcement. And I got a call from that organization after I wrote that book. And the head of it said, "You're the only writer I know who's ever used WIFL in a book. Would you like to come to our national convention and speak to our group?" So I went out, and it was me. I was in the ballroom. It was me. It was like 500 women, and they all had guns. I've never been that intimidated in my life. So I talked to a lot of them, and I have continued to talk to a lot of them over the years. And I, know, as a matter of fact, that it's still a man's world. Federal law enforcement in general, is still very much a male-dominated field. And I know that women have to work 3-4 times as hard to get to the same level. So I wanted to craft a character that would speak to that, and that became Atlee Pine. So I had the Grand Canyon as a geographic location for the first novel, Long Road to Mercy, and then the idea of Atlee Pine, this sort of maverick, rogue, didn't want to do the FBI bureaucracy, didn't want to go to the big field agencies. She wanted to be out in the hinterlands doing her own thing. That's all she cared about, was catching bad people. And she wanted to do it her way. So with that sort of in mind, I thought a perfect sort of starting point for a brand new series.
Mm-hmm. So Mercy is the fourth book of the Atlee Pine series. How did you pick her name?
Yeah, it was interesting. So Atlee is a very Southern name. It could be for a boy or a girl.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, my parents used to live on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, near Ashland. And I live up in Northern Virginia. So when we would go to visit them, you would get off the highway, Interstate 95. And if you went to the right, you went to where my parents lived. And you went to the left, you went to Atlee, Virginia. So I would see that sign every time I went to visit. When I was in high school, I played football and I wrestled. So we would also play sports against Atlee High School. Mm-hmm. And I just liked that name because it was sort of androgynous. It could be, and you don't hear it much anymore. I wanted to have sort of a very unique first name that you wouldn't expect. I didn't want her to be a Sarah or a Debbie or whatever. I just wanted it to be different. And the pine part was that she was tall and lean, like a pine. But at the same time, pine roots are very shallow. She's not a lady who really will commit to anything.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about one of the things that about the series is that instead of giving her an FBI story, you really gave her a personal story to figure out. Why? What was the thinking around that?
If you're going to start a series character, I like to think of it as loading up your lead character with baggage. I've done it with Amos Decker, my memory man. I've done it with all of my characters because it's not just one book, one and done, like a feature film. This is a TV series, for lack of a better description, a series of books. So you have to lay some groundwork. I don't want it to be just about every book is just about a case and that person solves it. I want to be able to grow and evolve the character. So loading her up with baggage, she was 6 years old. Her twin Mercy was kidnapped from their home in Georgia. No one knows what happened to her. It destroyed Pine's family. Her parents divorced. They eventually disappeared, leaving Pine on her own. And that has been the hole in her heart, for her whole life. And after Long Road to Mercy, she made a commitment that she finally needed closure. And for her to move forward in her life, she needed to figure out what happened to her sister. There was just no other way. Otherwise, she was never going to stay with the FBI. She was literally falling apart. Mm-hmm. So that gave me a lot of things that I could deal with in her character development, because the only reason to do a series is you bring the character back and you keep changing them, you keep growing them, you keep evolving them. Otherwise, it's just one case after another case. And that's, to me, is not interesting enough to justify bringing somebody back. I wanted to be able to grow that character. So with her, I had lots of ways to do that. She had a ton of emotional baggage. She was as strong and as she is physically and mentally in her job. Emotionally, she's really fragile and vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. And is that why you gave her the sidekick of Carol Balone?
Carol she was the touchstone, the lodestar. She was the one that kept Atlee tethered to earth and to reality. She was the mother that Pine really never had growing up, that nurturing and mentoring sort of protagonist. And I like the idea that normally in these types of situations, you have partnerships is usually guy in thrillers or guy and female sidekick. It's never two women, and it's almost never, except for like Tess Gerritsen and Rizzoli and Isles. It's never young and older, So in this you have a woman in her 30s and a woman in her 60s. You almost never see that. But I thought that it was important because I initially didn't think that Atlee really had the emotional wherewithal to make it through all of this by herself. So I gave her Carol as sort of a steadying influence that whenever Atlee, she's knee-jerk reaction sometimes and she wants to plow ahead. And Carol was sort of a calming influence, just kind of like a mom would be. No, wait a minute, take a breath, drink some water, pull it back. Let's think about this a little bit before we plunge in.
Right. Like a mentor, as you said. In the questions we have one about, is this your first female main character?
Yes, it absolutely is. I mean, I've certainly had some that were close. Michelle Maxwell and King and Maxwell, they were pretty much co-equals. But this is the first time I've had a female really driving the whole show. And I've enjoyed the heck out of it. I intend to bring her back after Mercy because I think she has a lot more room to grow. And I won't say it's easy writing from a female perspective. I think the only reason I can do it is because my whole life I've been surrounded by really strong, independent female role models. Both my grandmothers, maternal and paternal, lived with us the last 10 years of their life. My mom was a force of nature. She grew up in the middle of nowhere on a mountain in the 30s where, at 7 years old, she was doing stuff I wouldn't even do as an adult. I'd be too scared to do it, And my sister, my wife, and we raised a very strong, independent daughter. So I drew on those experiences and observations in building all of my female characters, and also clearly Atlee Pine.
Yeah, and when you made that choice to do a main female character, and two of them really, was your process different? Did you have to have beta readers read it in a different way?
I really tried to think through everything that I needed to put this relationship together on a positive footing. My wife has a lot of really good female friends. I have my sister the same, my daughter the same. And again, it's that curious observer mentality where I watch and listen and just soak it all in to see men and women. Everybody's out there, a man or a woman, they know what I'm saying is going to be true. We communicate in different ways, and men and women talk to each other differently. Men and men talk to each other differently. Women and women talk to each other differently. Just another, I'm going to call it a secret sign language, but it's just a different way of communicating. And depending on whether you know the person really well or not. So again, I tried to bring to bear, my experiences and observations over the course of my life to make these relationships as authentic as possible. I certainly, I give drafts to my wife to read, and she gives me really good feedback on, I don't need her to tell me what's terrific about the book, although I'll take it. You're brilliant, you really are. No, I'm not going to hear that from her. I need her to tell me what's wrong, what's weak, what doesn't ring authentic, what sort of, is just, I've missed it for someone, and she will tell me those things, and I'll go back and try to get it right. Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't seem right to somebody who's a real person out there living in the world, then when the reader reads it and they're a real person living out in the real world, they're going to read it and go, this doesn't sound right. It's not quite what it should be.
Right. And in asking about the main characters, Scott asked if you consider Jessica real as a main character or more of a co character, as you had said earlier.
Yeah, Jessica Reel and Will Roby, I think they're sort of like a King and Maxwell. They share equal billing and equal space. Certainly in the second novel, The Hit, I think Jessica had more of a dominant role in that one because it was really funny because I'd written The Innocent and I was going to bring Roby back. And I had this idea of, oh, he's this world-class assassin. What if I put him up against another world-class assassin? I remember writing my notes when I was just starting the story. And I was like, okay, the other person's going to be John somebody, John. And I was writing it down and doing some thought lines. And I was like, I went back and I crossed out John and I put in Jessica, and it changed the entire dynamic of the entire book and the series going forward. Two guys versus a guy and a girl. And I'm so glad I did it because Jessica Reel is a terrific character, and she was the perfect character and the perfect foil for Will Roby in that novel.
Yeah. So I know that this is a four book series, and it sounds like we'll be seeing a little bit of Atlee in the future. But what made you decide to make this like just a 4-book series? Because some series just go on and on and on and forever, and some and so that's a conscious choice.
Yeah, because this series, Long Road to Mercy, A Minute to Midnight, Daylight, and then Mercy. It's the first time I've ever done this where I've had a multi-book series with a character, but the underlying main plot went on for 4 books. I've never done that before. What Mercy? she solves other cases in each of the books, but What Happened to Mercy was a book that went on for 4 books. And at the end, I think, 4 books was long enough. My readers are really hung in there a long time with this, and I know they want some resolution, and they get it. Everything is explained and resolved in Mercy. But so that's really where that came from. And I didn't know if I could actually do it. When I first started writing it, I didn't know if it was going to be 2 books, 3 books. And after the 3rd book, and so much of the onion had been peeled back and revealed, when I sat down to write Mercy, I was like, this is going to be the book. Enough has been revealed in the first three previous books that this one I can bring it home, it'll be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was reading it, I thought the writing is so tight, there's not a spare word, you really get a sense of the character, the setting, the plot, all of it without a lot of extraneous, wordage, if that's a word. And I really love that. Is that something that's evolved for you over time?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. I look back at some of my earlier books that I really enjoyed and I thought were good, but I thought, you said in 100 words, which you could have far more strongly and powerfully said in 10. So over the course of my career, I've gotten less wordy, I've gotten less verbose, I've thought more about it. I always tell the story about Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln was president, he made it a practice to write as many condolence letters to mothers who had lost their sons in the war as he could. And you can imagine he wrote a lot of them. One of his most famous ones, he wrote to a woman who had lost all 5 of her sons in the war. They had all fought and fallen for the Union. And he began the letter by saying, "Dear Mrs. So-and-so, I apologize for the length of this letter. If I had more time to write it, it would have been far shorter." It would have been far shorter. He would have thought through every word. It would have been far more powerful. Think about it. The greatest political speech in the history of this country, the Gettysburg Address, it's only like 360 words long. It took Lincoln 2 minutes to give it. But every word rings with a power that I don't think you find in any other political speech in history. Mm-hmm. So I tried to bring that same spareness to my novels. I don't want to go on and on and on. I hate to hear myself write, I guess is the phrase I'm trying to say, because after a while, it's just for my own ego, and it shouldn't be for my own ego. I write when I need to write to get the story out. I like being lean and mean. I think that's the best way to tell a story.
Well, I think you're very successful, because I was really, I was like, wow, I don't have to dig through to find information. Like, it was boom, got it. I love it. Let's see. So I'm going to get to some of our questions from our audience, because we have a lot. Okay. What is the best piece of writing advice you've received over the years that you still use?
When my first novel was made into a film, so I worked some with William Goldman, legendary screenwriter. He wrote Rich and All the President's Men, The Princess Bride, and all that. So we were working together in going around to locations in Virginia for the film. This was before they started filming and all that, but we were working together on the script. And he said, "Do you know what my greatest fear is?" And here's a guy who's like a legend, right? And I was just a young new novelist. I was like 34, and I was like, "What, Mr. Goldman? What?" I felt like I was a school kid. And he said, "I have this terrible fear that I'm going to wake up one day and people are going to realize I have no idea what the hell I'm doing." And what Bill meant by that was, the day you think that you know what you're doing as a writer is the day you've lost the power to actually be a compelling writer. Because there is this unknown factor of this childlike wonder, this like using your imagination. What does it mean to use your imagination? It's not like you're using, you have a book that tells you exactly how to do this job. In most other occupations, you get really good at something by doing it over and over again until you get out all the errors and mistakes. And, I don't want to be on a plane where the pilot gets on the intercom and goes, "Hey, folks, I've flown this plane the same way for 30 years, but today I'm going to try something new." Hang on. You don't want that. But right. As a writer, that's exactly what you have to do. So for me, fear is a great antidote to complacency, because I could wake up tomorrow and say, I have a new book to write. And I could ask myself this question: how did I do it last time? And I just write the same story and change the names a little bit, and there you go. Instead, I always ask myself, how can I challenge myself and make myself scared that I can't bring the magic again? So that was advice to me that seems simplistic, but that a lot of writers, even after they've written a number of books, seem to fall foul of, where they get like, I know what I'm doing. This is easy. I'm just going to churn out another one, and there we go. You can churn it out, but it's probably not going to be something you should be proud of.
Right, absolutely. And you can tell from your each successive book that you're doing something different and trying something new. And we will talk about that in a little bit. But Elizabeth asks a question that I had about your research. How much time do you spend? How do you get access to experts and things like that? I actually wanted to know, if somebody was to look at your browser history, what would they see?
It would not be pretty.
Good thing you know people in the FBI.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. As my wife said, I'm on so many lists around the country. It's just not funny anymore. When I put together sort of my battle plan for every book, I sit down and say, I'm going to write about this arena, this area, this. What do I need to know, and how do I get to know it? Sometimes it's just straight research. You go to the library, you read stuff, and other times you need to go to these places and see it geographically. I did it for the Grand Canyon. Pretty much every place I've written about, other than North Korea, which I wrote about in the Target, I have been to that place, and I've seen it for myself, because I don't like having buffers in between. I don't want to get somebody else's opinion of what a place looks like. And then I become a journalist. I go out and I talk to people, and I try to research them as much as I can, so I don't waste their time. They know that I respect them by asking informed questions and not stupid ones. And then I just listen. Listening is a lost art. We don't listen really anymore. And I just ask questions, and I sit back and I just take it in. So those are the most important elements for me of research. And I don't do any more than I have to. And again, the most important point is I remember on my master class that I have online, I showed a binder and the name on the binder was nukes. This is like 1,000 pages that I had to read and go through to understand how nuclear weapons actually work. Okay. And then I showed in the book how much space that took in the novel. It was it's scattered out throughout the novel, but the sum total was a page and a half out of a 420-page novel. But I had to read 1,000+ pages in order to be able to write those 1.5 pages in such a way that they flowed beautifully with the story, and you didn't feel like you were hitting a wall of research and technical data that you just kind of flip through anyway. So that for me is the most important thing about research.
So how much time did you spend on girl cage fighting?
I'm not a fan, quite frankly. It's a brutal sport, but you have to do that. Not only did I, read a lot about it, you can see anything on YouTube, and you would watch these bouts on YouTube, and then I would listen to people before and after who knew all about that, sort of dissect these matches and see, this person did this, and this is why they lost. This person did that, and that's why they won. This was strength. These are weaknesses. These are some of the tips. These are some of the tricks of the trade, all this other stuff. So I had to, it didn't take up a whole lot of the book, but it was important. It was really important. It was really to find one character in the novel. So I had to get all of that right. And again, it wasn't very many pages, but God, it was a lot of research and a lot of just watching the stuff. How it all fell out.
Yeah, I'm going to go off script a little bit because I was a social worker before I became a librarian. And I find it, like you can have some serious secondary trauma as a social worker. And I wonder if, as a thriller mystery writer, and seeing these things in your research, if it causes any sort of, like, oh my gosh, I can't sleep tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've grown a lot more empathetic to lots of different people, over the years, just through my research to see how badly people can be treated. Look, you can have any occupation you want. Me, I wish that we didn't have, these businesses where people can make a lot of money by getting their brains bashed in, horrific gladiator struggles when, you see people knocked unconscious. I mean, we wouldn't want to see that on the street. We would try to stop that. And seeing it in these cage matches, or even seeing it on a football field. I've been a football fan, pretty much all my life. And then I remember watching a Super Bowl one time where before the Super Bowl, they brought all the most valuable players from other Super Bowls out, who were still alive. And guys that I had, seen as a kid, watched as a kid growing up, were sort of heroes of mine. And I see them marching out in wheelchairs, in walkers, Obviously suffering from, early onset dementia, and guys that were like, these were gods to me basically. And then I see that, and it just kind of blew me away. I mean, I understood, we all understand it as an incredibly brutal sport, and it's worth billions of dollars to people. So that's why we have it. But, you can't disregard the human factor to that
Hmm.
too. Yeah, it does affect me,
Hmm.
and when I write about other countries and hardships over there and what people have to go through, yeah, you just, you can't immerse yourself in that world and just blithely walk away from it.
Hmm. I think as a reader, I think we might forget that because we read it as a fiction, but you're reading it in your research as real people.
Oh,
So,
absolutely, and they are, even though I'm writing fiction, I'm basing all of this on real people, real events in the world, things that happen to other people. So yeah, for me, it is a very, very, very real sort of thing. Sounds like a
mhm.
movie newspaper.
So I'm going to go back to the questions because I love this one. And I had it too. Which books have been made into the films? And I know Absolute Power was, and I really, really want to know if you met Clint Eastwood.
Oh yeah, I met Clint several times, in fact, um, during the course of the filming and at some events later. I remember we were at the East Coast Oscars in New York, and we used to have it at Tavern in the Green in Central Park. And he was there. He was nominated for a film. And I remember Russell Crowe was there. He won for The Insider.
Hmm.
So Eastwood there with this huge table of people, and then one by one they all got up and left, including at the time his wife. I was like, God, they left Clint. He's all by himself. So I went over to him and I sat down and I was like, "Hey, you probably don't remember me." He looked over and he goes, "Absolute Power guy, how you doing?" So I was like, that made my day. Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah, that was cool. So I've had Wish You Well was made into a feature film with Ellen Burstyn and Josh Lucas. The King of Maxwell series was on for a year on TNT, and I'm the only thrill writer in the world who's had two Hallmark movies made of their work: The Christmas Train and One Summer, which was kind of cool. So I sold the John Puller series. He's my CID Army investigator. I sold that to Fox Primetime, so they're working on that for Fox Primetime television series. And then about 5 years ago, I created this spy thriller, not based on a book. It was about a woman who was a spy master decades ago, and she'd been underground for all that time. Then she was discovered and outed. Now she's having to live in that world again. And quite frankly, I thought it was dead. I didn't think anybody was going to do anything with it. And then I got a call that they're going to start filming it in Canada next year. It stars Patricia Clarkson as the spy master. She's a wonderful actress. And then a young actress named Natalie Emmanuel, who starred in Game of Thrones and Fast and the Furious. So you never know with these things. The things you think were dead are going to happen, and things you thought were a sure bet aren't going to happen. That's Hollywood.
That's what we hear. So this is an interesting question from Beth because I have a similar one. Is she says, how do you decide which characters you create will become a series? And my part of that question is, do your readers get mad when you start a new series because they want more of the older series?
Yes, the answer to that is yes, they do.
I'm one of them. Sorry.
Yes, I know. I was at an event in Atlanta a number of years ago. There's a big crowd, and I walked in to go to the podium to give my remarks, and all of a sudden, this guy in the middle of this huge crowd jumped up, cried out something. I couldn't even hear what he said, but I looked over and he was holding this huge, like 15-foot pole, and on the top of the pole was taped a stuffed camel. And he yelled out, "What do you think I want more of?" And the guy really startled me. I kind of looked over and I saw the stuffed animal. I couldn't tell what it was right away. And I just blurted out, medication. And he wanted more Camel Club, which I get that a lot from people. So yeah, they do. I mean, I think they're all interested in what I'm going to do with the new series, but yeah, they're like, "Hey, well, what about them? What about them? What about them? We haven't seen them in years. You're really falling down on the job." And I tell them, look, if I can think of a story to bring them back, not just to bring them back, but a story that actually will, further their arc more, then I'll do that. But it's tough sometimes. And, you reach a point sometimes with series characters where I've said all that I think I need to say about that. And then you want to move on to something else. But it's not set in stone. If I can think of something for King and Maxwell or the Camel Club or others, I certainly would bring them back. My litmus test for whether it's going to be a series or not is when I finish the first novel and I really want to spend more time with the character.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that is yes. And I think that I've got enough in there to bring them back for a good reason and see them grow a little bit more, then I will bring them back. If it's kind of a one and done, which is okay too, then that's all right.
Well, Elizabeth says in the chat, yes, we do. We get mad. We're passionate. Sylvia has a really interesting question. Do you ever look at autopsy reports of famous deaths? For example, a Joyce Carol Oates novel on a senator has a foot mark on the face of a woman found in the water in the car, and readers wonder whether that was based on a real autopsy.
I do. When I was growing up in Richmond, Virginia, which is where Patricia Cornwell lived, and she wrote Postmortem about the South Side Strangler. And she obviously does forensics incredibly well. And I lived in Richmond when the South Side Strangler was active. And I remember my brother and I would take turns staying with my sister who lived in that area just to make sure that she would be okay. And when I started writing mysteries and thrillers, I found the forensics of it fascinating. So I've been to morgues, I've talked with medical examiners, I've seen bodies in all sorts of states, not because I have a particular desire, but I need to understand how this world works. And it's a very technical, precise, unique sort of world. You would think that in a morgue, it would have to be super clean, just like a hospital. No, it's one of the filthiest places you'll ever want to go to. Nobody's worried about infections because the people are dead. So it's not going to happen. The people who are alive are robed and all that, but not so much the people who are on the slabs. And it's about the dead telling a story. So yeah, I've read lots of autopsy reports. I love the true crime podcasts. I've read the Marilyn Monroe autopsy report. It's full of errors and all the things. And you're like, yeah, she did not die the way they said that she died. Let's just start right there, okay? There's a lot more to the story, trust me.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you'll come up with, anytime you see something like that, I'm sure you come up with something really interesting. I missed this question that I thought was really interesting. Dom asks, how do you keep all the different main characters of the different series straight so that they remain constant from book to book? And can I add, do you write more than one book at a time?
It's a good question. To answer the last question first, yes, I do. Right now, I'm writing 2 books at the same time. I spend like 2 weeks on one and 2 weeks on the other. And I didn't know if that was going to work for me, but it really has, because you get 2 weeks on one book and you kind of spent everything you thought about what you want to do, but your mind has been thinking about the other book at the same time. So you go fresh and you hit that hard. And I feel like I'm really re-energized. It's brand new material and off I go. And for me, it's, since I've created the characters, it's almost like birthing a child. So I'm not going to forget all the main elements. And I have favorite characters depending on when you ask me, just like parents have favorite kids. Depends on the day you ask, I might have a different one. Every parent can understand that. But for consistency, on a film set, they have a scriptie, and it's his or her job to make sure everything is consistent. So for me, if I'm writing a story about Atlee Pine or Will Roby or John Puller, and I'm not sure about something that I've written before, I just go back and reread, where I think it is in the novel to make sure that I'm consistent. So I don't want to screw up if I don't have to about things like that, because I will get emails because people will know the difference and they'll know that there was a mistake and they'll let me know. So yeah, it's almost like a re-education sometimes. I have a good memory, but it's not infallible. So yeah, sometimes I have to go back and hit the books.
Yeah. And Marion asks, if you don't pre-plan the ending, do you ever end up with several different endings and you have to pick one?
That's a great question. That has happened to me. I almost give myself latitude. And then when I get to the end, I can go in a number of different directions. And then you have to sift through everything, go back through what you've written and go through the story and come to the end and try to work which one of these is best. Or is it I take a piece from one and a piece from another and combine them in a unique way that I never really thought of initially. Because once you travel the journey and you know every step of the way, just because you've done it for the last 7 or 8 months, things become a lot more clear. The clarity level is really astonishingly high. So it's almost like you know exactly, how you want that story to end. And sometimes it is taking bits and pieces from different possible endings and put it together. And then you're like, I've had those eureka moments where I was like, that's it. That is how it's ended. And sometimes when I'm not prepared to tell what the ending is going to be, but I'd like people to read the novel, I'll do what's called a pin ending, PIN, pin ending. and I'll send it up to them. And I'll say the ending is a pin ending. They know what that means. It's not really going to be the ending of the novel, but I want them to read everything up until that point, and then give me feedback on that. And while they're doing that, I'm figuring out what that real ending should be.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a writing group or a beta group that reads your books?
My wife reads them.
Oh, you had mentioned that.
Yeah, my agent reads them. My editor obviously reads them. Other than that, I don't really send them out to anybody else. I will send out pages, not the manuscript, but pages to people who have lent me expertise. Let's say it's a military matter,
Mm.
a financial matter. I'll send them those pages, discrete pages, and say, look, do I have it right? Or comment on this and make sure that you think it passes the smell test, and then they'll do that. So I do that sometimes, but it's a very, very small group of people who read the entire manuscript.
Mm-hmm. Dottie has a really interesting question of when and why do you decide to create a new series?
I think it could come from the fact that I'm interested in the subject. I'll give you an example. When I was in Florida earlier this year, I was riding my bike, and I thought about this idea for a new character, much younger than the characters I normally write, in a world that I've never written about before, but that I know a lot about and find kind of fascinating. So that prompted me to begin writing a novel about this character that I know that he will come back in another book or two or three.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just like, what am I interested in at this moment in my life? What do I want to know about? What do I want to write about? And again, with this character, I did it, one, because I wanted to write about that stuff because I think it's interesting and I've never done it before. And two, I just felt like it would be a good departure for me to write about people in their 20s and 30s, because people in that time, in that age bracket, they have different ideas and dreams and all that. It's different when you're writing about people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. These are people that probably haven't had kids yet. They're still thinking about what they want to do with their life. And for me, it was kind of like, fear is a great antidote, complacency. What scares me? Can I write from that age group? My kids are that ages. And I certainly lived around them a long time. I know them intimately, but can I really bring that home in a way that seems authentic? It would to somebody of that age, a millennial or a Z or an X. So that's sometimes what drives me, is like, scare myself again.
Mm-hmm. That's right. The safe scare. So a lot of people are asking if you're going to be writing certain characters in the future, and you had already sort of answered that if it comes to you, you will. I thought this question was awesome, that you've had some characters do crossovers into different series, but for the most part your series are distinct. But are you tempted to pull an Avengers style novel and bring more of them together?
Yeah, I think it would be very cool for me to do a Justice League kind of thing. Here they are. Amos Decker, John Puller, Will Roby with the sniper rifle, Atlee Pye, and here comes Mercy, with her UFC skills. It's tempting. It would be tough to pull that off. I think the biggest problem, not that I couldn't come up with a story, but then one reason I don't like the Justice League sort of ensemble cast movies as much as I like the single ones is because none of them have enough screen time. So then you do this on 8 characters, then who gets the most page time? Is, Decker going to crowd out the other? Is Will Roby going to shoot somebody so we can have more page time? And then you don't do it justice. Then the story kind of falls flat. And it's almost like all you're doing is, skipping a rock across water, because you have like 7 spots you have to hit. It's got to be really fast. And then you don't get the depth that you would ordinarily get. I don't have the luxury of spending pages on one character's backstory. And that would be the only reason not to do it like that. But yeah, am I tempted? Of course I'm tempted, because, that would be kind of cool to be able to pull that off.
Mm-hmm. Well, you are a master storyteller, so if anybody can do it. So we have a ton of questions, and we're not going to get to them tonight because we're about out of time. But the one question that 2 questions have come up to end our evening. One is, what are you reading right now?
I'm reading a couple of novels that hopefully I'm going to give blurbs on. They're not out yet, so I won't tell the titles, but they're from, new and upcoming writers. Some of them are debut novels that are really good. I'm actually in the middle. I'm reading Colson Whitehead's Harlem Hustle.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the name of it. And hopefully I didn't get that wrong. Terrific novelist. I've been recommending a book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson to a lot of people. I think that everybody in the world should read that book, because it helps you make sense of a lot of things that seem sort of nonsensical and don't make sense at all. So I would highly recommend that. I love, I'm going to be getting a lot of books for Christmas. I know people just love to give me books for Christmas. I love to dive into them. So, reading is people always ask me, well, you write all the time, you must not read books anymore. And I'm like, no, no, no. Reading is a huge part of my life. And there's nothing better than thinking about a book that you had to put down because you had to go do something and wanting to get back to it. And then when you get back to it, you get curled up in a comfortable chair and you jump into someone else's imagination, which is exactly what you do when you read a book. It's someone else's imagination. That's the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah. I mean, fiction is ultimately the escape route, right? To get away from what's happening in reality.
Yes, it is.
And then in addition to that, just a little addendum to that question is, have there been any writers that have been your inspiration to be the kind of writer you are?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up, one of my favorite writers growing up when I was in high school and college was John Irving. I'd write nothing like John Irving, but I admired his discipline, his use of language. And he would I call him like sort of the Mark Twain of his generation. Mark Twain did the same thing. I'm on the board of the Mark Twain House, and my wife and I started the Mark Twain Literary Prize about 5 years ago. And we just gave it out this year to Stephen Graham Jones for The Only Good Indians, which is a terrific novel. But like Twain, Irving can tell these huge, sprawling yarns over multiple generations, take on substantive issues, but he does it with humor, which I can't tell you, it's really hard to do. I mean, really, really hard to do. So he was an inspiration. I was a big Garrison Keillor fan. I love like Wool Begone Days and all its progeny and things like that. I love mysteries. Obviously, I read Twain growing up. So lots of different books. But I think if I had to pick one growing up who I would go back again and again and again to read and to see how he did his craft, it would be John Irving.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really interesting. And people in the chat are like, we love John Irving. So we're definitely on to something. And the last question is, what's up next for you from the reader perspective? We want to know.
So next year will be an anomaly for me. I'm going to have 3 books out next year just because of the pandemic. All my travel was canceled. I sat home and wrote, and I was very productive. So in the spring, you'll have Dreamtown, and it's the 3rd Aloysius Archer. It's 1953. He's in Los Angeles. He's a gumshoe, the golden age of Hollywood at that point. I think it's by far the best Archer book I've written. I've really got his voice down, and he's got some years under him now, and he's the PI that I wanted him to be. I'm a huge Ross McDonald fan. Blue Archer was a fantastic character, and Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett before him. And then in the summer, you're going to see The 620 Man, and that's the new book I was telling you about. I wrote when I was in Florida, and the 620 refers to that's the train he takes on the Harlem Blue Line into Manhattan every day to work in the city. And things that he sees and experiences while he's on the train leads to this sort of, pretty intense mystery. And then in the fall will be the next Amos Decker, my memory man. He'll be back in November, and I'm working on that book right now. So it'll be 3 Baldacci books next year for everybody.
Oh my God, we're so excited. And we didn't get to talk about your charity, but can you just give us a quick, tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, the Wish You All Foundation, I think it's the 20th year. My wife and I founded it 20 years ago. We fund literacy organizations and initiatives across the country. And our goal is to eradicate illiteracy in this country. About 100 million adults, about half the adult population, read at the 2 lowest levels of literacy. And I think it's not just about reading the next bestseller on the beach. It's about being a fundamental participant in a democracy, because you have to be able to read and synthesize a lot of information, how to decide to make good decisions at the voting booth and all the other things throughout the course of your life. So for me, being able to read and being able to think are exactly the same thing. You can't do one without the other. So if we have everybody who reads at a high level, I think we'll have a much better country. Look, if everybody read books more, if everybody went to the library more, the world we would live in would be far, far better for everyone.
So I won't say the obvious, but I'm going to say it is preaching to the choir. I'm like 100, 1,000% on that. So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation and for your work in literacy, because we wouldn't be able to do this, what we do, without you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all of our burning questions.
Oh, I enjoyed it very much. I love doing this. I love supporting libraries. I mean, they're part of the ecosystem. You have writers, you have publishers, you have bookstores, you have libraries. We all need to support each other to make this ecosystem healthy and thriving.
Absolutely. So again, you can buy signed books from David from Wellesley Books. I know the link is in the chat. Mercy is out now, and it's the fourth book in the series, and we hope to see more of those characters, Alti, and Plum and Kane. Oh my God, I'm getting them all mixed up. But whatever you write, we will read, David. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you all for being here and staying with us and being part of this wonderful evening. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.